Chapter 16. Briefly, through another's eyes. She had followed him as he ran, her car moving slowly along the street and avoiding the other drivers who would move about her. She remained inconspicuous to his attention, but watched him as he ran slower and slower over the last 2 blocks. She did not stop immediately when he stopped running, and, huffing heavily, moved toward the building to sit on the sidewalk, his back against the wall. She instead pulled up about 4 car lengths further and parked in a spot that was clearly marked as not being a legal parking spot. She put her hazards on, shut her engine, and locked her door. She doubted she would get towed and would risk the ticket to see if she could help the boy who was distressed. She walked along the sidewalk towards him and paid no mind to the people who walked past him. They had stresses of their own, and none so bad that they would seek to help another to avoid facing their own turmoil. She had no misgivings about why she was doing this. She was offering help to this child not only to do good for the sake of doing good, but because it gave her reprieve from the bothersome reality she was immersed within. She did not know how to wade through her problem, so she would help this kid, if she could. His knees were raised, and he rested his arms on them, his head buried in his arms. He rocked slowly from side to side. Knowing that she might startle him, she approached slowly on his right side, said nothing, and simply sat down next to him. He was aware of her sitting and peered to his right by turning his head slightly. "You don't need to talk," she said, "but can you understand me?" He looked back down to the ground and nodded his head. "Good." She inhaled. "I saw you running." She leaned her head toward him. "Were you running from someone who hurt you?" He shook his head without looking up. "Were you running from someone who said they would hurt you?" Another head shake. "Were you running from someone who you hurt?" He looked at her to verify the question and then shook his head. "Good," she said as he looked back to the ground. "Were you running to someone you care about?" He shook his head. "Were you running to school?" He hesitated and then shook his head. "I see." She leaned her back against the wall. "You were running from school." He looked at her and slowly nodded. "Well, you can't be that much older than my own daughter, and I know what school is like for you kids these days." "How old is she?" he asked. "A little over 10 years old," she replied. "Is that how old you are?" 11, he said, as he turned his head back down away from her, rolling his forehead against his forearms for comfort. She tried not to draw comparisons between he and her, but could not help but notice the calluses on his hands. "It's a rough age to be in school, I know. There is so much more you feel like doing than just sitting there." He looked at her again, and she figured she had struck a chord with him. "But I will let you know something," she said, implying secrecy. "They want you in school to learn, but also to give older people a chance to work." He furrowed his brow because her answer confused him. "You see, everyone wants to work, and I bet you could do any number of jobs, but us older folks need to work too, and if all the kids were working, what would we do?" He shrugged. "I just want to make money to help my family. You're 11, kiddo. You don't need to worry about money. You can know what it is, but you'll have many more years when it will be a large concern. Right now, enjoy it while you don't need to worry about it." "But my family needs it now," he said. He cut himself off and slowed his talking down. "My mom and dad have to pay hospital bills for their new baby." "Oh, You have a new baby brother or sister?" she asked, framing his discord in the notion of the new sibling causing him stress. "I don't know," he replied. "Hasn't been born yet." "Oh, I understand." She looked at him. "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" He shook his head. "So you are about to be a big brother for the first time," she said matter-of-factly. "That's a big responsibility, but you don't need to run away from school to help. Do you expect the baby to start working to help pay for the hospital?" He shook his head. "Then you need to know you are not expected to do anything more than stay in school and learn as much as you can so you can work where and how you want to." She stood up, and by the magic that is conversation, he stood up as well. "I'm Manny," he said to her. "Hi, Manny." She shook his hand. "I'm Meridia, and I hope you are feeling better." They let go of each other's hands as he nodded. "Good. Now, I am not going to offer you a ride, and if someone my age who you just met offers you a ride, you should not take it. But I want you to promise me that you will head back to school." He nodded again. "Do you promise?" "Yes," he replied. "Okay, you are on your honor." She pointed him back down the block. "On your way." He turned around and started walking, and she stood there watching him. He did not turn back to look at her, and she thought about trailing him in her car. She turned and walked back to her car, unlocking it as the officer walked up, and nodded at her before she got in her car. "Just in time," he said, and they both knew what he meant.